Okay, let's get right into it. We're talking about a book that's, well, pretty legendary and definitely notorious. Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. Whether you've read it cover to cover or just heard the whispers, its ideas about strategy and influence they're just impossible to ignore. And that really brings us to the big question, right? How is it that a book that's over 25 years old is still so incredibly popular and, let's be honest, so controversial? I mean, you'll find this thing on the bookshelves of CEOs, huge celebrities, and even in prisons. So what's the deal? Let's find out. So the first thing you have to get your head around is this. Green presents power as something that isn't good or evil. It just is. He argues it's a fundamental part of how we all interact. It's a game, he says, with timeless rules. And his book? Well, it's basically the instruction manual for how to play that game and play it well. All right, so let's start with the book's core philosophy, what Green himself calls the unseen game. He argues that the most effective kind of power isn't about brute force at all. No. It's achieved through something much, much more subtle, more strategic. So Greene's whole argument boils down to this. Power is a social game. It's a battle of perception, of psychology. It's not just about what you do. It's about what other people think you're doing. The real key is mastering your own emotions while, at the same time, figuring out what makes everyone else around you tick. Now for our first major principle, and honestly, this one is a huge deal. Everything you do, every single action, is seen through the filter of your reputation. It is the absolute cornerstone of your power. And Law 5 doesn't mince words on this. It says your reputation is your most critical asset, period. A strong one can scare off enemies and win you allies before you even lift a finger. But the second it gets damaged, you're vulnerable from every single side. To really see this in action, we've got to look at the story of Mitsu Xia. He was a favorite in the ancient Chinese court of Wei, and he had spent years building this reputation for being incredibly dutiful and gracious. And that reputation was about to be put to the ultimate test. So you need a little context here, because it's crucial. There was this super strict law. Anyone who secretly used the ruler's personal coach would have their feet cut off. No exceptions. But one day, Mitsu Xia's mother gets sick, so he fakes an order and takes the coach to go see her. When the ruler finds out, he's not punished. Instead, he's praised with these exact words. So here's the wild part. Mitsu Xia broke a serious law, one that came with a horrifying punishment. But because his reputation was so spotless, the ruler saw this crime as a beautiful act of loyalty to his mother. His reputation completely changed the reality of what he'd done. Okay, let's keep building on this. The next big principle is all about creating value. But it's not about how useful you are, it's about how rare you seem. It's really just simple supply and demand when you think about it. If you're always around, always available, your presence just gets devalued. You know the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. But if you strategically pull back, you create scarcity. Your absence actually makes people want to see you more. And when you finally do return, you seem more powerful, more important than ever. I mean, even Napoleon Bonaparte understood this perfectly. He knew that being seen too much, even as an emperor, would just diminish his aura. So by limiting his public appearances, he made every single one feel like a huge event, and that just magnified his power and his prestige. And this idea applies to your actions too. The book uses this fantastic metaphor, the honeyed bear trap. See, a powerful hunter doesn't waste energy chasing the bear all over the forest. Nope, they lay some bait and they let the bear come to them. The ultimate show of control is making other people react to your moves, forcing them to come onto your turf and play by your rules. All right, for our last principle, we're going to touch on what is maybe the most ruthless part of these laws, the need to appear flawless, even and especially when you're not. So for this, let's look at the Chinese general Cao Cao. He's in a really tough spot during the collapse of the Han Empire, and he makes a huge mistake. He messes up the math on his army's grain supply. With food running low, his soldiers start to grumble. A mutiny is basically right around the corner. What he did next was just an act of pure, cold-blooded logic. Cao Cao had two choices. He could admit he screwed up and lose all authority, or he could find a scapegoat. He chose the scapegoat. He calls in his commissary chief, publicly accuses him of corruption, and has him executed on the spot. The soldiers totally buy the lie, morale shoots back up, and the general's reputation for being a genius it stays perfectly intact. His mistake was buried right along with an innocent man. So when you look at these examples, you see that the 48 laws are not about being nice. They're not about being fair. They are a cold, hard look at what has worked for powerful people all throughout history. The book really is a guide to strategy that sees the world as one giant chessboard. Which, of course, leaves us with one big final question that just kind of hangs in the air. You can learn the rules, you can play the game, and hey, maybe you can even win. But in the process of mastering this ruthless kind of strategy, what part of yourself might you have to sacrifice along the way? That's definitely something to think about.